Hello everyone, it's Saturday the 27th of November, the day before Advent Sunday. Yes, Advent begins tomorrow. Surely it begins on 1st of December, you say, when we open our calendars. Well, yes and no. The church, funny thing that it is, always has 4 Sundays in Advent, hence the Advent wreath with the 4 red candles, each one lit on the Sunday before Christmas. I think you can guess when the white one in the middle is lit. And so tomorrow starts this preparation period for Christmas. And the church, being the church, of course, doesn't start with some jolly passage about Christmas. It starts with a passage about the end of the world, what we call apocalyptic writing, which we think of as meaning the end of the world, but really the Greek word it comes from means unveiling or revealing, like the book of Revelation, which is the greatest known, best known of the apocalyptic writings. And some of this stuff seems really rather far-fetched, like fantasy or science fiction. Listen to the opening from Luke chapter 21 of our passage. Jesus said to his disciples, "There will be signs in the sun, the moon and the stars, and on the earth distress among nations, confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken." It does seem a bit far-fetched, but in fact the passage before this talks about Jerusalem being surrounded by armies. And everybody at the time of this was written, or at least when it was first put down in writing, would have known that this meant the destruction of Jerusalem by the Roman armies in AD 70, 40 years after Jesus, when at the end of the Jewish revolt, started in AD 66, eventually Rome won, surrounded Jerusalem and conquered it and razed the great temple, the house of God, to the ground. And in a sense, the world did come to an end then, certainly the Jewish world, with its focus on the house of God and the animal sacrifices and everything else that this great building represented. All that's left of it now is what we now call the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. And so the Jewish people themselves had to rebuild their lives and their worship. But the passage moves from history to an unspecified time. The Son of Man coming on a cloud. Now, that's not Jesus flying through the air. It's again a reference to a passage from Daniel chapter 7 in the Old Testament, where this strange figure called the Son of Man, who represents the faithful but suffering people of Israel, is finally vindicated by God and triumphs. And for the early church, and for Jesus himself, it seems, this figure represented him, the true faithful one, where all the people were not, triumphing in the end. It all seems rather far-fetched, all this stuff, doesn't it? But we are struggling, and have been, I think, for a generation since 2001, the destruction of the Twin Towers. We are entering into a different world, a different paradigm, as they say. The financial crisis of 2008 really still has its ripples, and of course we have the pandemic and increasing signs, a word you find in this passage, of climate change, which is our version of the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the roaring of the sea, and all that stuff I quoted. Not least, of course, the rise of power and influence of authoritarian countries like China and Russia, or strong populist leaders who give simple but false answers to complex problems. See Brazil, for instance. But amongst all this crisis, we are told to lift up our heads in hope, for our redemption, our freeing, is nearer than we think. And whatever crises we're going through, and it is crises plural, not crisis, hope is the one thing we definitely need. Not just the hope, but the action that springs from it. Have a good Advent.